when we evaluated our project for off grid, one of the things I got into was how do you read a battery spec sheet? And what I found was there's actually a couple of different phases to a lead acid battery. They call it a float phase, an absorb phase, and a bulk phase. And when you look at this battery chart, you can actually see the float phase, the absorb phase, and the bulk phase. Or actually, that's kind of a trick. The float phase is invisible. That's the clue. And so what we're looking at the graph is there's an inflection point. It's right there for the graph on the right. I'm not quite sure where the inflection is here. It may be something right around there. Where it goes from say a straight line to something that's more stressed. And this is analogous to a stress strain curve, where the battery could be stressed in this range, but then it gets strained when it goes into that range. It gets stressed when it goes into this range, and then gets strained when it goes into that range. And so what we're talking about here is the absorb versus the bulk phase of the battery. And the short of it is you want to avoid the bulk phase of the battery. The absorb phase is more elastic. When you get into, you want to operate in the absorb range. And then when you get into the bulk range, that's when you want to crank your generator and charge the battery back up to the top. Now, the float range is the very top of the battery. And you'll notice there's really not much going on right here. When you're operating at the top of a battery, there's a few things that'll happen. Is one, the batteries might be rated for, it might be a 48 volt battery bank, and that's the nominal voltage. But a 48 volt battery, when you read the spec sheet, it may actually have a higher voltage rating. It may be like 58 volts or something like that. Well, float phase is when you're getting to the top of the absorb phase, and it says, what does it take for me to charge this battery all the way from 48 volts all the way up to its maximum voltage threshold of 58? Well, it starts to be a more and more inefficient process. And so, you really don't ever charge the batteries up to their maximum voltage. In fact, that's part of the maintenance process, is that you charge them to the maximum voltage, about once a month, or in periods of heavy use, you might do that. It's called an equalization charge, and you're basically applying so much power to the batteries that you're driving up the battery bank voltage, and supposedly that's better for the battery. We'll talk about how batteries degrade in a minute, but it's kind of like plaque on top of your teeth. Is the battery anodes develop plaque as part of the chemical reaction. And I believe the equalization of charging it up to the higher voltages kind of busts some of the plaque off of the anode. But it's a very high energy intense process. If you have a lead acid battery bank, you have to have a generator or a grid connection in order to provide enough stable energy for the battery maintenance. I mean, I suppose you could do it with a solar array if you started at 10 a.m. and you saw that there would be not a cloud in the sky. But it's recommended to have a generator or a grid connection for this kind of equalization process. The other point is when you get into the bulk phase and you start operating and cycling the battery, that's when that concept of if you deep cycle a lead acid battery bank, it won't charge back up again. It's really once you pass this inflection point, you start damaging the battery. And so the curve on the right is a low end lead acid battery. And this low end lead acid battery, it really should only be operated to, really right around the 40, 35 to 40% depth of discharge. And once you discharge it down to 30 or 45%, you need to crank that generator on and push it back up again. Whereas with this kind of industrial battery, you may be able to get it all the way down to a 65% depth of discharge before having to charge it back up again, and you're still operating in the safe spectrum of that battery. And so generally these inverters will have a setting on them that you say, okay, turn a generator on when I hit that point. And that way you can protect a lead acid battery from getting too far in. And, the question is, well, with a starter battery, the curve might even be more extreme. And so, with a starter battery, you may be running the generator more often than you would with a nice, big, deep cycle lead acid battery bank. And so, when we get into the off-grid case study, the client said, I want to go off grid, but I don't want to have to listen to a generator running every single day. And what that meant is we needed to go for a very large, deep cycle battery bank. If he had had a different attitude, if he's like, well, let's go off grid, I'll run the generator every day and see what my energy usage is, and then when the batteries conk out, we'll replace them with something that's more site specific. That actually might be a more cost effective design methodology, because this is new construction. So instead we went for comfort, and that comfort comes with a cost. Some different brands of batteries: lithium iron phosphate, that's an expensive one. Then you got lithium, kind of lower end lithium ion batteries. I see a lot of LG Chem batteries now being installed, and LG Chem and Mercedes have both kind of like scooped Tesla, in the sense that they're getting their products out to market to installers a little bit more quickly. Tesla's still ramping up. LG Chem is kind of the market